The Arizona sun burned white against the desert, yet the sound that broke the horizon was not of gunfire or engines of war. It was the slow, rhythmic roar of a Caterpillar D7 tractor, crawling through dust like a patient animal of steel. A line of them, yellow, caked in sand, their treads chewing the ground, dragged field guns, hauled lumber, leveled a road in hours. Around them stood a group of German prisoners in faded uniforms, men who once designed tanks for the Reich. They watched in silence. They had believed that machines were made for killing, that true power came from armor, from cannons, from velocity. But here, under the open sky of Arizona, they saw a different kind of machine, one that conquered the earth itself. Sergeant Otto Klein, once an engineer at Krupp, whispered to another, "They move the war itself." His words disappeared into the dry wind. By nightfall, the tractors had built an entire encampment, canvas tents aligned, roads compacted, artillery positioned. The prisoners had never seen construction so fast. In Germany, even with forced labor, such a setup would take days. Here, a dozen men and a few machines had done it before sunset. A U.S. mechanic leaned from his tractor and called out jokingly to a fellow driver, "She eats dirt better than any tank." The laughter echoed off the canyon walls, carried faintly to the prisoners who stood still. Engineers rendered speechless, not by fear, but by realization. In his notebook, Oberleutnant Karl Messner wrote a single line that night: "If you can move the earth, you don't need to conquer it." It was an admission, quiet but seismic, from a man who once believed superiority was measured in steel and firepower. Now, surrounded by dust and American efficiency, he began to sense that this country's true arsenal was invisible. Its practicality, its patience, its power to build faster than others could destroy. The Caterpillar D7's diesel heart thudded through the camp long after lights out, a mechanical lullaby that replaced the memory of war drums. In the barracks, someone murmured, "It wins wars without firing a shot." Outside, the tractors stood in a row beneath the stars, their engines cooling with a soft ticking sound, as if the desert itself was listening. When the guards allowed the German engineers to approach the machine, curiosity overtook pride. The Caterpillar D7 sat there under the pale morning light, its paint dulled by dust. The engine cover lifted like the ribs of a beast laid bare. The prisoners gathered around it. Men who had once drawn blueprints for the Panzer III, who could recite every gear ratio by memory. Yet what they saw inside this American tractor defied their instincts. A massive six-cylinder diesel engine, forged not for elegance but endurance. No chrome, no polish, just raw, honest metal. Its fuel lines were thick, its pistons large and slow-moving. "It's crude," muttered one of them, touching the valve cover, "but it refuses to die." The U.S. mechanic beside him smiled. "That's the idea, pal. We don't build for speed. We build so it never quits." That single sentence, spoken casually through the smell of oil and sunburnt steel, carried a philosophy that no propaganda could teach. The German engineers realized that Americans weren't trying to outsmart their machines. They were trying to make them immortal. This was an engine that could run for 72 hours straight without overheating, even under full load. Tests from the Peoria factory had shown it could push over 10 tons of soil per minute, consuming just 1/3 the fuel of a German equivalent. Numbers that sounded exaggerated in theory but came alive before their eyes. For hours, the prisoners watched as the tractor moved from one task to another, clearing brush, dragging artillery, hauling timber, and never once stopped. By noon, the same engine that had worked since dawn still roared steadily, its rhythm constant, its heartbeat unbroken. A few of the prisoners exchanged glances, half in disbelief, half in quiet respect. At dusk, Lieutenant Hans Faber, once a precision designer in Stuttgart, sat by the fence and wrote in his small black diary, "They build machines not to win glory, but to endure it. This engine does not rest. It doesn't even ask permission from war." As the sun sank behind the hills, the Caterpillar's silhouette looked like a monument in motion. a reminder that strength was not always found in speed, but in persistence. The men who once measured superiority in millimeters of armor now found themselves humbled by an agricultural machine turned soldier. What they saw beneath that metal hood wasn't just an engine. It was a lesson about civilization itself. That durability, not brilliance, sustains empires. The rain came suddenly over Louisiana, thick and red with clay. The prisoners stood ankle-deep in mud, the air heavy with diesel smoke, and the sweet, metallic scent of wet earth. The American soldiers laughed as the ground swallowed their boots, but the Germans, trained to see terrain as an enemy, watched in disbelief as a convoy of Caterpillar D7 tractors rolled forward unbothered. The lead machine plunged straight into the marshy field where any Panzer would have sunk and choked. Instead of wheels, it glided on wide steel tracks that spread its weight across the mud like the feet of some prehistoric creature. Each rotation of the continuous track pushed, pulled, and lifted the machine forward without struggle. "They don't build roads," whispered Oberleutnant Messner. "They carry their own." The Americans called it the mud test. In less than 2 hours, Caesars, those tractors had cleared a kilometer of ground, laying crushed gravel as they went. Engineers followed behind, marking the new trail with white stakes, transforming swamp into solid road. The Germans, used to watching their own vehicles bog down, even in light rain, could only stare as the machines did what seemed impossible. Sergeant Otto Klein noted the math automatically. Each D7 could tow 20,000 pounds through terrain with a traction coefficient below 0.4, its engine torque peaking at 2,000 RPM. Those were not numbers of elegance. They were numbers of inevitability. He remembered the endless repair columns in the Eastern Front, the tanks buried in snow, the wasted fuel. Here, no men shouted orders, no chains clanked in panic, just the hum of machines that trusted their own design. Nearby, a young American corporal handed out coffee from a tin thermos. One of the prisoners accepted it awkwardly. "You test your machines like soldiers," he said in broken English. The corporal grinned. "They are soldiers." He pointed at the yellow behemoth crawling through the swamp. "That one built an airfield in New Guinea before I even joined up." By evening, the storm had passed. The field where they stood had turned into a clean stretch of road, hard-packed and ready for trucks. The Caterpillar engines idled as if proud of their own work. In the fading light, the Germans realized something unsettling. America didn't just move men across continents, it moved the continents themselves. Lieutenant Faber closed his diary with a smear of mud on the cover and wrote his final line of the day. "In this war, the ground belongs to whoever can move it." The machines kept working into the night, their headlights carving tunnels of light through the mist, engines echoing like the pulse of a living world that refused to stop. By 1944, the war had swallowed continents. Yet far from the front lines, another kind of army was fighting its own relentless campaign in Peoria, Illinois. There, the Caterpillar factory rose like a city of iron and steam. Conveyor belts snaked through vast halls the size of airship hangars. Welding sparks flashed like summer lightning, and the air thrummed with the heartbeat of industry. When the German engineers were shown wartime footage of this place, they expected disorder, chaos from such scale. Instead, they saw rhythm. Tens of thousands of workers, many of them women in overalls and kerchiefs, moved with mechanical precision. Each had a task so small it seemed meaningless. Yet together, they built something enormous. A machine capable of remaking landscapes. In Germany, every vehicle had a name, a lineage, a craftsman's touch. But in America, each Caterpillar rolled off the line like another note in an endless symphony. "They build without sentiment," whispered Otto Klein as he watched the reels flicker on the screen. "And yet somehow, it feels alive." The numbers told their own story. In 1944, the Peoria plant alone produced over 20,000 tractors for the war effort. Across the United States, the machinery industry employed nearly 1.5 million people, half of them women. Assembly never stopped. Shifts rotated around the clock, steam whistles marking dawn, noon, and midnight. Even the river outside carried barges loaded with engines to be sent overseas. A short segment of the film showed a woman named Mary Coleman tightening bolts on a D7 transmission. The foreman's logbook noted she completed the same operation 1,427 times without a single defect. "She builds roads for victory," the narrator in the footage said. To the German prisoners, that phrase lingered longer than any statistic. That night, in the barracks, Karl Messner wrote, "In our country, genius builds machines. In theirs, the ordinary builds miracles." The Americans had replaced individuality with process, a system so efficient it became indistinguishable from instinct. The prisoners realized this was the secret weapon they had never understood. Not one perfect machine, but thousands of good ones. Not one genius, but millions of hands. As the projection ended, the room went dark. For a moment, the engineers sat silent, the film's final image burning in their minds. A line of yellow tractors, endless, crawling out of the factory gates into the dawn, moving like a tide that nothing could resist. And somewhere deep inside, the men who once worshipped precision felt something unfamiliar. Envy for a world where imperfection, multiplied by millions, became unstoppable. Long before the American infantry reached the front, the earth itself had been conquered by machines. Across North Africa, in the shattered hills of Italy, on the black sands of the Pacific, the yellow silhouettes of Caterpillar tractors appeared, crawling, digging, and lifting where no soldier could advance. At Salerno in 1943, a D7 bulldozer pushed through rubble under sniper fire to clear a path for medics. Its driver, Private Frank Malloy, refused to leave the seat even when bullets struck the blade. When the road was finally open, ambulances rolled through carrying dozens of wounded men. Newspapers back home ran a brief headline, "Bulldozer Saves Battalion." To the Germans who read about it in captivity, it sounded like propaganda until they saw the film reel for themselves. The footage flickered across the barracks wall at Camp Algona. A Caterpillar pulled a Sherman tank from a crater in Normandy. Another carved a runway on Saipan while still under artillery fire. The machines never stopped. Even when shells fell nearby, they pressed forward, throwing up clouds of mud and courage. Sergeant Otto Klein whispered to himself, "They fight with shovels." His fellow engineer Faber replied, "No, they fight with will." Every front told the same story. Bulldozers flattened airstrips for P-47s within 48 hours of capture. They built pontoon ramps over rivers in Belgium. They cleared debris in Manila's ruined streets, pushing through the smoke like silent soldiers. For every tank destroyed, 5 new Caterpillars were shipped overseas, over 60,000 by 1945. It was a war of movement, and these machines were its heartbeat. Among the prisoners, the gossip spread quickly. One rumor said that a single Caterpillar at Monte Cassino had worked 72 hours nonstop to rescue trapped men, its engines screaming through the night. Some refused to believe it. Others stayed awake, staring into the dark, imagining that roar echoing through the mountains. In the mess hall, an American sergeant once joked, "Our tractors build the future while yours blew it up." The Germans laughed nervously, but the line stayed with them. As viewers, imagine standing in that muddy field, watching a yellow machine, unarmed and fearless, drag a wounded tank back to life. What would you feel? Pride? Envy? Or a quiet shame that it took a war to prove which kind of strength endures? Tell me in the comments. If you had to choose, would you rather build the road or march on it? That night, the prisoners could still hear the distant rhythm of the engines. For them, it was no longer just a sound of labor. It was the pulse of something greater, something that did not end when the guns went silent. The war ended, but for the German engineers, the questions it raised did not. When the surrender came in May 1945, they were no longer enemies, just men with calloused hands and restless minds, unsure of what to believe. In the months that followed, many of them were assigned to work on reconstruction projects under American supervision. That was when they saw the Caterpillar again. But now, It wore no insignia, no camouflage. Its blade shone like a tool of rebirth. Lieutenant Hans Faber was sent to a rebuilding team near Kassel, where a convoy of ex-military tractors had been repainted with bright yellow enamel. The same machines that once carved runways in Saipan were now clearing debris from German streets. Their engines, still steady as before, pushed aside ruins and opened the arteries of cities that had forgotten how to breathe. Faber wrote in his notebook, "They are not here to conquer us. They are teaching us how to begin again." He had once believed power came from domination. Now he saw it in reconstruction. In the way an American operator wiped oil from his hands, nodded politely, and wordlessly passed him the controls. That simple gesture broke something inside him. Not pride, but distance. At a work site in Frankfurt, another former prisoner, Otto Klein, asked an American engineer why they kept using the same tractor models. The answer came with a grin. Because they already proved themselves. In war and peace. Klein looked at the worn Caterpillar plate, still scarred from shrapnel, and whispered, "It fought, and it still works." The American laughed softly. That's the point. The machines had outlasted ideologies. What once built airfields now built homes. What once leveled battlefields now cleared playgrounds. It was as if the war itself had been reversed through motion, the same power now used to heal. For the German engineers, this realization was heavier than defeat. They began to see that industrial genius was not measured by destruction, but by endurance, by usefulness beyond violence. If you were one of them, standing amid the rubble, holding the same wrench you once used for war, would you feel guilt or relief or something in between? Tell me what you think in the comments. By autumn 1946, as repatriation began, many prisoners returned home transformed. Some wrote to the Peoria plant, offering gratitude and even sketches of improved track mechanisms. They were no longer rivals, but apprentices of resilience. The world had been rebuilt, not by speeches or flags, but by engines that refused to stop. Engines that whispered through diesel breath, "Work. Don't hate. Move forward." The years passed quietly, and by the 1950s, Europe was alive again with the hum of industry. But for a few former German engineers, the sound that haunted their memories was not the scream of sirens or artillery. It was the deep, patient rumble of a Caterpillar engine. One autumn morning in 1953, Hans Faber stepped off a train in Hamburg. He had been invited to consult on a new construction project, a highway stretching toward the Elbe. As he walked across the site, he froze. Before him stood a line of yellow tractors, their blades cutting through morning fog. The same shape, the same growl, the same slow grace. On the side of one machine, beneath layers of new paint, he could still see faint scars of wartime service. Fragments of shrapnel sealed under enamel, like fossils of conflict. An American foreman noticed him staring. "Old friends?" he asked. Faber smiled softly. "Yes, they used to fight wars." The man nodded. "Now they build peace." That day, the machines worked as they always had, pushing soil, leveling ground, laying the bones of a road that would carry thousands of people each day toward something better. For Faber, it was more than construction. It was redemption cast in steel and diesel. He remembered the Arizona desert, the Louisiana mud, the factory film in Peoria. He had seen machines that built victory. Now he saw machines that built life. Meanwhile, Otto Klein, now a civilian engineer in Stuttgart, often took his son to watch bulldozers clearing land for new housing. When the boy asked what they were, he answered simply, "Engines that never stop moving." Sometimes he caught himself adding, "They win wars without firing a shot." Across the Atlantic, the Peoria factory still roared. The same lines, the same hum, now producing tractors for farmers and builders instead of soldiers. Yet the spirit was unchanged. Build faster than the world can break. As dusk settled on that Hamburg site, Faber lingered after the engines stopped. The last rays of sunlight turned the machines gold. In the stillness, he could almost hear the echo of that desert night years ago. the steady ticking of a cooling engine beneath a sky full of stars. He realized that the true legacy of war was not the ruin left behind, but the will to repair it. And in that moment, as a worker climbed onto the seat of a dust-covered caterpillar, Faber felt something close to peace. Because some machines, like some lessons, never stop moving. The war ended not with thunder, but with the hum of engines. Across the decades that followed, the caterpillar's sound became part of the modern world's pulse. From the deserts of Arizona to the riverbanks of the Rhine, from ruined cities to newborn highways. What began as a tool of necessity became a symbol of endurance. For the men who once studied it as captives, the machine outlived ideology. It had no flag, no anthem, no enemy. It existed to move, to shape, to rebuild. Hans Faber would later tell his students that America's greatest strength was not its weapons, but its willingness to turn the engines of war into the tools of peace. Otto Klein kept the wrench he had borrowed in 1945, polished smooth by time, a reminder that creation requires the same precision as destruction, but infinitely more patience. The caterpillar's story is not just about metal and motion. It is about the idea that progress can be a quiet, continuous force, steady, humble, and unstoppable. Every engine that refuses to die carries the memory of men who learned, too late, that true power is measured not by how much ground you take, but by how much you can lift others from it. Tonight, somewhere in the world, another tractor hums beneath a rising sun, pushing soil, clearing paths, preparing for the next generation to build. The war is long gone, but the work, the human will to construct, to mend, to endure, never ends.